The hospital room was cold, too cold for a place meant to bring life. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Dr. Harrington stared at the ultrasound screen. His eyes narrowed, his hands tightened around the clipboard, and then he looked up at the man sitting across from him. Alexander Grant, one of the world's youngest billionaires. "Mr. Grant." The doctor's voice trembled, as if the words themselves were too heavy to carry. "I must speak plainly. This pregnancy, it doesn't make sense. You need to consider divorce. Immediately." The words crashed like thunder in Alexander's ears. Divorce? His wife Eleanor was carrying the child they had prayed for over 3 long years. And now this? His powerful heart, used to commanding boardrooms and bending politicians to his will, skipped a beat. For the first time in his life, Alexander Grant felt powerless. Eleanor sat frozen on the examination bed, one hand instinctively covering her still flat stomach, her dark eyes wide with disbelief. The air between husband and wife grew heavier than stone. And in that silence, a seed of suspicion was planted, a seed that would grow into betrayal, heartbreak, and a war that threatened to destroy not just a marriage, but an empire built over 4 generations. My beautiful family, welcome back. Every story I bring to you is more than just words. It is my soul, my sleepless nights, my love poured out only for you. Please, stay with me until the very last moment, because every ending carries the deepest twist, the hidden beauty, and the reward of my hard work. When you stay till the end, you give value to my effort and my promise to never fail you. If your heart is true, comment present. If your loyalty is real, comment, I am with this family. And to my new family joining us today, if you ever doubt me, ask the old family. They will tell you how I carried this home with pure love, how I gave without limits, how every story I share is a gift. Because what you're about to hear is not just a tale. It is a mirror of greed, betrayal, and the fragile threads that hold love together in the richest of homes. Tonight's story will prove a bitter truth. Money can buy everything except loyalty. And Alexander Grant, the billionaire who had the world at his feet, was about to discover he was the poorest man alive. The Grant estate stretched over 200 acres of sculpted lawns, marble fountains, and glass towers that touched the sky. To the outside world, it was a palace of wealth and power, where Alexander Grant, the 36-year-old billionaire media tycoon, lived a life most men could only dream of. Helicopters hovered in the distance, private jets bore his name, and magazines routinely crowned him the empire maker. Inside the mansion's grand dining hall, a crystal chandelier worth more than a small country glittered above a table that had seated kings, presidents, and Hollywood royalty. But tonight, the chandelier would witness a more dangerous spectacle, the quiet unraveling of a family legacy. Alexander sat at the head of the table, his dark tailored suit hugging a frame sculpted by years of polo and personal trainers. He tapped his fingers restlessly on the mahogany surface. To the world, he was a man of unshakable control. But tonight, beneath the polished exterior, a storm brewed. At his side was Elena, his wife of 3 years. She was breathtaking, her olive skin glowing against the ivory silk of her gown. Her beauty was effortless, yet it carried warmth, a softness that had drawn Alexander to her when he first saw her at a charity gala in Florence. To the gossip columns, she was the queen of grace. To Alexander, she was the woman who had given him hope, love, and laughter after a lifetime of cold negotiations. But there was a problem. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of whispered prayers, 3 years of fertility treatments, hopeful tests, and crushing disappointments. And still, no child. In any other family, that would have been private heartbreak, but in the Grant dynasty, it was a crisis. At 72, Charles Grant, Alexander's father, had built the media empire from dust and sheer willpower. He was a titan whose words could make or break governments, yet age and illness had withered his body, leaving him a shadow of the man who once ruled every boardroom. His will, however, remained ironclad. The condition in his revised testament was clear. Alexander must produce a legitimate heir by his 37th birthday, or the empire, worth $40 billion, would be donated to charity. No cousins, no distant relatives. A true grant by blood, or nothing. Every clock ticked louder as the deadline loomed, only 11 months away. Charles's obsession with legacy was infamous. A man without an heir, he often said, is like a tree without roots. No matter how high he grows, he will one day topple. Sitting across from Alexander tonight was Helena Grant, Charles's second wife and Alexander's stepmother. At 46, she was elegance wrapped in crimson silk. Expensive surgeries had polished her features into cold perfection. To society, she was the grieving widow who had given Charles comfort in his old age. To Alexander, she was a predator in pearls. Helena had brought her own son, Adrian, from a previous marriage into the family 15 years ago. At 29, Adrian was handsome, clever, and utterly ruthless. Raised under Charles's roof, but carrying no Grant blood, he had always been the outsider. Yet he moved with the arrogance of a man convinced the world owed him everything. For years, whispers circulated that Helena's true ambition was not love, but power. That she had married Charles to secure a fortune, and that Adrian would one day inherit the empire if Alexander failed. Alexander knew this. He had seen the glances exchanged between Helena and Adrian, the quiet conversation, as that ceased when he entered a room. But he had dismissed them, believing his marriage to Helena would secure his position once and for all. Until tonight. Helena's voice, smooth and poisonous, broke the silence. 3 years of marriage, Alexander, she said, swirling wine in a crystal glass, and still no heir. How tragic for a dynasty that controls the truth of 12 nations. The words landed like daggers. Helena's face flushed, her hand gripping the edge of the table. Alexander's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening against the wood. We are trying, he replied, his voice clipped, defensive. Trying. Helena savored the word like fine wine. Some women simply aren't built for bearing children. Perhaps it's time to consider alternatives. Before Alexander could respond, Adrian leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at his lips. Brother, you know I feel for you, he said, his tone dripping false sympathy. The pressure you're under, it could destroy any marriage. Maybe you should see a specialist. I know an excellent doctor. The exchange was casual to an outsider, but in the Grant family, words were weapons. Alexander recognized the look in their eyes. His stepmother and stepbrother weren't offering advice. They were circling like vultures, waiting for him to fail. His gaze flicked to Helena. She sat in silence, her face pale, her eyes clouded with shame. She had carried the burden of their childless marriage on her shoulders, enduring endless whispers from staff, friends, and society. Now Helena had twisted the knife in public, under the watchful eyes of the chandelier. Alexander reached for her hand beneath the table, but she pulled away, not in anger, but in quiet despair. And in that small gesture, Alexander felt the first crack in the perfect life they had tried to build. The chandelier gleamed above them, casting fractured light across the table. And to the world, it was the picture of elegance, a billionaire family sharing dinner in their marble palace. But beneath the crystal glow, shadows lengthened. A dying father obsessed with legacy, a stepmother who thrived on manipulation, a stepbrother hungry for power, a wife whose silence screamed louder than words, and Alexander Grant, the billionaire at the center of it all, watching his perfect world fracture piece by piece. What none of them knew was that a storm was already gathering, and soon a doctor's warning would shatter the illusion of control forever. Because in the Grant family, betrayal wasn't an accident. It was tradition. The following morning, a pale winter sun rose over the Grant estate, casting long shadows across its marble corridors. Alexander had barely slept. His father's will echoed in his mind like a drumbeat, produce an heir or lose everything. At breakfast, the dining table glimmered with silver platters and porcelain cups, yet neither food nor luxury could ease the tension. Elena sat across from him, dressed simply in a lavender blouse, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. She sipped her tea quietly, avoiding his gaze. Just then, the family physician, Dr. Edward Harrington, arrived. He had been with the Grants for over 3 decades, delivering Alexander into the world and standing by Charles through countless health scares. To the family, he was more than a doctor. He was part of the dynasty. But that morning, his face bore an unfamiliar weight. "Mr. Grant," he began after pleasantries, setting a sealed envelope on the table. "I received the latest reports regarding Elena's checkup." Eleanor straightened in her chair, hope flickering across her face. For weeks she had been complaining of fatigue, nausea, and dizziness. Could it finally be the miracle they had been praying for? Dr. Harrington hesitated. He cleared his throat, glancing at Alexander, then back at Elena. "The results are complicated." Alexander's fingers froze over his coffee cup. "Complicated how?" "There are anomalies in the blood work," the doctor replied, fully. "Markers that I cannot immediately explain. Nothing conclusive, but enough to warrant further investigation." Elena's hand trembled as she set her teacup down. "Are you saying I'm sick?" No, Harrington quickly assured her. "It's nothing life-threatening, but it does raise questions that could affect the family's legacy." His voice softened on the last word, but the meaning was clear. Legacy. The one word that haunted the Grants more than death itself. Alexander's stomach tightened. He wanted to dismiss the doctor's words, to believe it was just another medical glitch, but the haunted look in Harrington's eyes gnawed at him. Elena reached for the envelope, but Alexander snatched it first, scanning the cold medical jargon. His world blurred. He didn't fully understand the data, but the highlighted notes made his heart hammer. Inconsistencies, irregular markers, recommendation, further genetic testing. The doctor lowered his voice. "Mr. Grant, I would advise a discreet consultation with a specialist. And," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "I would advise caution in your personal decisions until you know the full truth." Caution, a polite word for suspicion. Alexander clenched the papers in his fist. "Are you suggesting—" His throat constricted around the accusation. The doctor said nothing. Silence was its own verdict. Elena's face crumpled. "Alexander, please, you don't believe—" But before she could finish, the sound of heels clicking against marble announced Helena's arrival. She entered like a queen into her throne room, wrapped in scarlet silk, diamonds glittering at her throat. "What a charming morning," she said sweetly, her eyes darting to the envelope in Alexander's hand. "Ah, doctor's reports. How fascinating." Eleanor's face reddened, but Helena ignored her, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She stirred slowly, each movement calculated. "You know, Alexander," she began casually, "Charles once told me the greatest tragedy for a powerful man is to raise another man's child as his own. He said it was worse than death." The words sliced through the air like a knife. Elena gasped. "That's cruel, Helena. And it's not true." Helena lifted her gaze, her smile sharp as glass. "Is it? We all know the stakes. Billions of dollars, a legacy spanning generations. Tell me, my dear, what wouldn't a desperate woman do to secure her place?" The implication hung heavy in the room. Alexander slammed his hand on the table. "Enough!" His voice trembled with fury. "You will not insult my wife." But even as he defended Elena, a sliver of doubt slithered into his heart. What if? Helena rose gracefully, brushing invisible dust from her gown. "Of course, darling. Forgive me. I only speak out of concern for the family." She leaned close, her perfume sharp, her words softer but laced with venom. "You must be very careful, Alexander. Sometimes love blinds us to truth." With that, she drifted from the room, leaving silence and suspicion in her wake. Later that day, Alexander retreated to his study. The envelope lay before him on the desk, its papers spread like evidence in a trial. His mind was a battlefield. On one side, 3 years of love, shared dreams, whispered promises in the night. Elena's laughter, her tears, her unwavering support through every storm. On the other, his father's ultimatum, the Empire's weight, Helena's poisonous whispers, and the doctor's cautious warning. Could Eleanor betray me? The thought was unbearable, yet it gnawed at him. He poured himself a glass of scotch, staring at the family portraits lining the walls. Generations of Grants looked down on him, stern faces, proud eyes, men who had guarded the Empire like a holy flame, and now the flame threatened to die in his hands. A soft knock interrupted his torment. Elena stood at the doorway, her eyes red from crying. "Alexander," she whispered, stepping inside, "do you trust me?" Her question cut deeper than any accusation. He wanted to say yes, to crush the doubts, to believe in her completely, but his lips refused the lie. "I don't know anymore." Her face crumbled. She turned away, one hand pressed against her stomach. "I thought we were fighting together, but maybe I was wrong." She left before he could answer, her footsteps echoing like a verdict in the empty hall. Alexander sank back in his chair, his chest heavy with guilt and doubt. For the first time in his life, the empire he had spent decades building felt meaningless. What good was power if he couldn't even trust the woman he loved? Outside, storm clouds gathered over the estate, their shadows creeping across the marble floors. The first cracks had formed, and soon the entire world would come crashing down. Because in the Grant family, suspicion was never an accident. It was a weapon. The first rains of spring swept across New York, washing the city in silver and thunder. At the Grant estate, thunderclouds loomed, but inside the mansion, a different storm brewed, one that no weather could match. Eleanor had spent the morning pacing her chambers, her silk robe brushing against the polished oak floor. Her trembling fingers rested on the small pregnancy test she had hidden for days. 2 pink lines stared back at her, fragile, undeniable proof of a miracle she thought she'd never hold. For 3 years, she had endured heartbreak after heartbreak, whispered insults from Helena, Adrian's mocking smirks, and Alexander's silent despair. And now, fate had finally granted her the gift that could change everything. But along with joy came fear. Fear of whether her husband would truly believe her, fear of the questions already circling like vultures waiting for a carcass. Still, she knew she couldn't keep it secret. Not with Alexander's 37th birthday looming just months away. Not with Chichaj, Arles Grant's inheritance condition pressing on their marriage like a noose. It had to be said, tonight. That evening, the family gathered in the great dining hall. Candles burned in crystal holders, their flames reflecting in the dark mahogany table. Charles Grant sat at the head, his once mighty frame now frail, but his eyes sharp as blades. Helena hovered at his side, her crimson lips curved in their eternal half-smile. Adrian lounged with practiced arrogance, sipping his wine as though the empire already belonged to him. Alexander entered last, Eleanor on his arm. He looked weary, shadows under his eyes, but he held himself with the dignity of a man born to command. Eleanor's grip tightened around his hand as if drawing strength from him. Dinner began with silence, broken only by the clinking of cutlery. It was Eleanor who shattered the tension, her voice trembling yet resolute. "I have an announcement," she said, rising to her feet. Her gaze swept the table, finally resting on Charles. I'm pregnant." The words fell like lightning. Charles froze, his fork suspended mid-air. For a heartbeat, silence stretched unbearably long. Then a spark lit in the old man's eyes, something between relief and triumph. His lips trembled as he whispered, "An heir." The air shifted instantly. Staff members gasped. Adrian's wineglass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Helena's smile stiffened, her eyes narrowing like a serpent that had just been struck. Alexander's chest clenched. He turned to Elena, his heart leaping, joy, disbelief, fear, all colliding at once. Pregnant? His voice was a mixture of hope and doubt. Elena nodded, tears glistening. Yes, Alexander, we're going to have a child. For the first time in years, Charles's frail hands trembled with something other than illness. He reached for his cane, forcing himself to stand. The Grant line will continue, he declared hoarsely. The Empire will be secured. Applause broke from the staff, but it was drowned by Helena's icy laugh. How convenient, Sid, he purred, her eyes locked on Elena. 3 years of failure. And suddenly, when the will is rewritten, when the deadline is upon us, a miracle? She arched an eyebrow. What impeccable timing. Elena flinched, her joy bruised in an instant. It's true, Helena, I swear it. But Adrian leaned forward, his smirk returning. Forgive me, brother, but don't you think it's suspicious? For years, nothing. Then, suddenly, your wife delivers the one thing that secures your empire. He swirled his wine. Some men call that luck. Others call it strategy. Alexander's fists clenched beneath the table. Rage burned inside him, but beneath it a darker thought whispered, what if they're right? Helena leaned closer to Charles, her voice dripping with poison. You must be careful, my love. In a family like ours, loyalty is rare. Sometimes women will do anything to hold their position, even if it means carrying another man's child. The words hit the table like daggers. Elena gasped, tears springing to her eyes. How dare you, she whispered. This is Alexander's child. I would never betray him. But Helena only tilted her head, smiling coldly. Then you have nothing to fear, once the truth comes out. Alexander's chest tightened. He wanted to shout, to silence Helena and Adrian, to defend Eleanor with all the strength he had. But the doctor's earlier warning clawed at his mind. Inconsistencies, irregular markers, further genetic testing required. He looked at Eleanor, his wife, the woman who had shared his bed, his secrets, his life, and yet doubt coiled around his heart like a snake. Eleanor saw the hesitation in his eyes. Alexander, she whispered, broken. Tell them this is our miracle. But his lips refused the words. Silence hung heavy, more damning than any accusation. Later that night, Alexander stood alone on the balcony, rain soaking his suit, the city sky, line glittering like 1,000 lies. Inside, the echoes of Helena's laughter haunted him. What if the child isn't mine? The thought was unbearable, yet relentless. Eleanor approached quietly, her robe clinging to her slender frame. You didn't defend me, she said softly, her voice trembling. Alexander turned, guilt etched on his face. Eleanor, You think it too, don't you? Her tears glistened in the rain. You think I betrayed you. He reached for her, but she stepped back. I've given you my heart, my soul, my life. And now, when I finally give you the one thing you begged God for, you doubt me. Eleanor, it's not that simple, he said, his voice breaking. The stakes, the empire, my father. Her laugh was bitter, hollow. So the empire means more than me? More than us? He had no answer. Elena's shoulders slumped. She pressed a hand against her stomach, as if shielding the unborn child from his doubt. I thought this baby would bring us closer, but it's only tearing us apart. She walked away, her sobs echoing through the marble halls. Alexander sank against the balcony rail, rain mixing with the salt of his tears. The storm above raged, but none compared to the storm within him. The revelation that should have saved him, the child that should have secured his empire, had instead planted a deeper, deadlier question. Is this truly my heir, or the beginning of my downfall? And as the lightning split the night sky, Alexander Grant realized one bitter truth. In his world, joy was never free. Every gift carried a price, and the bill was coming due. The Grant estate had always been filled with whispers, maids exchanging rumors in the kitchen, guards speculating about succession in the gardens. But tonight, the whispers belonged to Helena and her son. The crimson glow of the fireplace bathed Helena's private sitting room as she swirled a glass of wine, her eyes glittering with malice. Adrian lounged opposite her, boots on the velvet sofa, his grin as sharp as broken glass. "So," Helena said smoothly, "the little dove claims she's pregnant. How?" "Miraculous," Adrian chuckled. "Miraculous isn't the word I'd use. Convenient fits better." He leaned forward, his tone mocking. 3 years of failure, and then suddenly she delivers the golden ticket. It stinks of desperation. Helena tapped her long nails against the rim of her glass. "Exactly, and desperation is a weakness we can exploit." She stood, pacing before the fire, her silhouette stretching tall against the flames. "Listen carefully, Adrian. Alexander may believe he's secured the empire with this pregnancy, but if we can prove that child is not his—" Her smile widened, cold and lethal. "The empire collapses into our hands." Adrian tilted his head, curious. "And how do you suggest we prove that, Mother? We can't exactly peek into the child's bloodline." Helena's eyes glinted. "No, but we can create doubt strong enough to destroy Alexander's faith in Elena. Once suspicion takes root, it grows like ivy until it strangles everything in its path." Adrian smirked, raising his glass. "To doubt, then, our greatest weapon." They clinked their glasses, sealing their unholy pact. The very next day, whispers of another man entered the story. Marcus Chen. Tall, sharply dressed, with an effortless charm honed in the cutthroat world of finance, Marcus was Alexander's oldest rival. The son of a Shanghai magnate, Marcus had spent years circling the Grant's empire, waiting for an opening. His brilliance in business was rivaled only by his reputation as a man who could seduce secrets from anyone, especially women. And Helena knew exactly how to use him. At a high-profile art exhibition in Manhattan, Eleanor arrived alone, dressed in emerald satin, her presence turning heads as always. Alexander was absent, buried in late meetings at the Grant Media headquarters. Helena, of course, had encouraged Eleanor to attend. "The public needs to see you glowing," she had said, sweetly. It was there, under the glimmer of chandeliers, that Marcus appeared. "Eleanor Grant," he said smoothly, bowing slightly as though she were royalty. "I must say, you outshine every painting in this hall." Caught off guard, Eleanor forced a polite smile. "Mr. Chen, I wasn't expecting to see you here." Marcus's eyes lingered on her, calculating. "Oh, but I go where beauty and opportunity meet. And tonight, they both led me here." For the rest of the evening, he lingered, offering her champagne she politely refused, making subtle jokes, drawing attention from the crowd. Cameras flashed, whispers grew, and Helena, watching from across the hall, hid her smile behind her glass of wine. By midnight, society columns were buzzing. Eleanor Grant seen laughing with rival billionaire Marcus Chen. Where was Alexander? The poison had begun to spread. Days later, Helena summoned Dr. Harrington to her chambers. The old physician arrived reluctantly, aware that nothing good ever came from private meetings with her. "You've served this family faithfully for decades," Helena purred, pouring him tea, "and I trust your loyalty will continue, especially if generously rewarded." Harrington stiffened. "I serve the truth, Mrs. Grant." Helena's smile didn't falter. "Truth is a flexible thing, Doctor. Paperwork, reports, a few words here or there, and truth becomes whatever we wish." She slid an envelope across the table, thick with bills. "Do this, and you secure your retirement. Refuse and, well, accidents do happen, even to trusted family doctors." The old man's hands trembled. Sweat beaded his brow. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, he opened the envelope. "What do you want?" he whispered. Helena leaned forward, her voice like silk wrapping around steel. "You will create medical reports that show irregularities. Suggest markers inconsistent with Alexander's DNA. Nothing definitive, of course. We don't want immediate answers. just enough to plant doubt in my stepson's heart, enough to make him question whether his precious Elena has been faithful. Dr. Harrington swallowed hard, guilt clawing at his conscience, but greed and fear outweighed loyalty. Slowly, he nodded. Within a week, the reports appeared in Alexander's study, sealed, clinical, devastating. He read them under dim light, each line another knife to his chest. Genetic anomalies, inconsistent markers, recommendation for paternal testing. His hands shook. He dropped the papers, his mind spinning, the memory of Marcus at the gala, his wife's soft laugh echoing in his ears, flashed like a dagger. Could it be true? Eleanor entered moments later, her face glowing, a soft smile on her lips. Alexander, I wanted to tell you, our child kicked today. I felt it. Her joy was pure, radiant, but Alexander's eyes were haunted, his voice hoarse. Elena, tell me the truth. Is this child mine? Her smile shattered. Tears welled instantly. How can you even ask me that? But his silence was louder than any accusation. Elena clutched her stomach, her voice breaking. I have given you nothing but love. And now, when I finally give you a child, you doubt me? Alexander turned away, his heart breaking even as suspicion gnawed at him. The poison had done its work. That night, Helena and Adrian toasted once more in their chambers. It has begun, Helena whispered, her eyes gleaming. The empire will eat itself from within. By the time truth surfaces, it will be far too late. Adrian grinned, raising his glass. To poison, mother, the sweetest kind, words. Outside, the storm lashed the estate, lightning splitting the sky, and somewhere in the shadows, Marcus Chen smiled, already planning his next move. Because in wars of wealth and legacy, love was never the strongest weapon. Suspicion was. The Grant Foundation's annual gala was the crown jewel of New York's social calendar. Every year, the city's elite gathered beneath the glittering dome of the Metropolitan Grand Hall, politicians, CEOs, celebrities, foreign dignitaries. To be invited was to be blessed, to be noticed was to ascend. That evening, the marble floors shimmered beneath golden chandeliers. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of champagne and caviar. Cameras flashed at the entrance as Alexander and Elena arrived, hand in hand, a picture of power and elegance. Elena's emerald gown clung gracefully to her form, her stomach showing the first delicate curve of pregnancy. Photographers whispered, the heir of the Grants. Alexander's dark suit was tailored to perfection, but beneath his polished exterior, doubt gnawed at him like a parasite. He smiled for the cameras, but his jaw was tight, his eyes shadowed. Beside him, Eleanor glowed with quiet joy, unaware of the storm about to break. Inside, music from a string quartet filled the air. Guests circled like jeweled hawks, exchanging shallow pleasantries. The Grants commanded the center of attention, as always. Charles Grant, too frail to attend, had sent his blessing from the estate. Helena and Adrian, however, glided through the hall like predators disguised in velvet and silk. Helena kissed cheeks, whispered in ears, her eyes never straying far from Eleanor. Adrian charmed young heiresses, laughing too loudly, spreading casual remarks that stung like venom. It's strange, isn't it? After 3 barren years, suddenly a miracle child. Curious, very curious. And then, as though scripted by fate, Marcus Chen appeared. The rival billionaire moved through the crowd with lethal charisma, every step calculated. He wore a midnight tuxedo, his smile disarmingly warm. Guests parted for him as though sensing danger yet craving his attention. When Marcus approached Elena, the room shifted. Elena, he said smoothly, bowing slightly, you look radiant tonight. Pregnancy becomes you. A hush rippled through the hall. Whispers hissed like snakes. How did Marcus know? Elena flushed, startled. Marcus, this isn't the place. But Marcus saw imply smiled, his eyes flicking briefly to Alexander. "Forgive me, I only wished to congratulate the father." His pause lingered just long enough to sting, whichever man he may be. The words detonated like a bomb. Gasps erupted, phones lifted, recording discreetly. Society fed on scandal, and this was a feast. Alexander's heart pounded, his fists clenched. Rage and humiliation surged like wildfire. For weeks he had battled whispers, suspicions, forged reports, and now, in front of the city's elite, his rival mocked him, implying his child was not his own. He could have ignored it, he could have walked away, but pride, legacy, and poisoned doubt pushed him over the edge. He turned on Elena, his voice sharp, echoing over the string quartet that faltered into silence. "Tell them, Elena. Tell them this child is mine." The room froze. Glasses stilled mid-air, conversations died. All eyes turned to the billionaire and his trembling wife. Elena's face paled. "Alexander, please, say it!" His voice thundered, breaking years of polished composure. "Before God and society, swear that this child is mine." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. She reached for him, her voice breaking. "It is yours. I swear it on everything I am." But his rage had already tipped into cruelty. He pulled the sealed medical reports from his jacket, slamming them onto a table for all to see. "Lies!" he spat. "The doctor's reports say otherwise. Genetic anomalies, inconsistencies. Tell me, Elena, did Marcus father this child, or some other man?" The crowd gasped. Cameras zoomed closer. Murmurs erupted. He accused her publicly, at his own gala. Elena's sobs echoed in the silence. She shook her head violently, her gown shimmering with every desperate motion. "No, Alexander, how could you believe them over me, over us?" Helena's lips curled into a smile as she whispered to a nearby guest, loud enough to be heard. "Such scandals always begin with a woman's betrayal." Adrian chuckled darkly, adding, "The empire is rotting from within." Marcus stood silent, his expression unreadable, but the damage was done. His smirk said enough. Elena collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. "I carried your pain for 3 years," she wept. "I endured their whispers, their cruelty, and now, when I finally bring you joy, you destroy me." Alexander's chest heaved, torn between fury and guilt. But the venom Helena had planted, the forged reports, Marcus's insinuations, all of it drowned out her pleas. "Enough," he said coldly. "If you are innocent, prove it. Until then, you are nothing but a stranger in my house." The hall erupted in chaos. Guests whispered behind manicured hands, phones buzzed with messages racing across the city. The billionaire accused his pregnant wife of infidelity. At the gala, Elena rose slowly, her body trembling, her dignity the only shield she had left. She looked around the room, faces watching, judging, recording. Then she looked at Alexander, the man she had loved beyond reason. "I gave you my soul," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But you gave me only doubt. May your empire keep you warm at night, because I will not." With that, she turned and fled the hall, tears staining her gown like a trail of broken dreams. The aftermath was immediate. Gossip columns exploded. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire's public meltdown, pregnant wife accused at gala." Clips of the confrontation spread across social media, replayed endlessly. Alexander's rage, Elena's tears, Marcus's smirk. Investors called in panic, share prices wavered, politicians hesitated to associate with a dynasty drowning in scandal. And through it all, Helena and Adrian thrived. Helena fanned the flames, whispering to journalists, "The Grants deserve honesty. If Elena is innocent, she has nothing to hide." Adrian slipped through the chaos, shaking hands, sowing doubt, presenting himself as the future of the empire. But Alexander Bedkishiyalabushi, one in his penthouse that night, was left with silence. His whiskey glass sat untouched. The city lights outside mocked him. He replayed Elena's words again and again. "I gave you my soul." But you gave me only doubt. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to run after her, fall to his knees, beg forgiveness. But the reports on his desk chained him, and the whispers in his mind screamed louder than her pleas. For the first time in his life, Alexander Grant, billionaire, empire builder, heir to a dynasty, was not the man in control. He was the man on trial, and his jury was the world. The mansion that once brimmed with light and music now felt like a mausoleum. Chandeliers glowed cold and lifeless, hallways echoed with silence, and the scent of Elena's perfume, jasmine and vanilla, lingered faintly, mocking Alexander's every breath. 3 days had passed since the gala. 3 days since he had humiliated the woman he once swore to protect. The scandal still flooded headlines, and investors still whispered about the empire's future, but none of it mattered to him now. The empire could burn. The only thing he saw was Elena's tear-stained face as she fled into the night. Alexander had called her phone countless times. Each attempt went unanswered. Her friends refused to speak. Her family stayed silent. It was as if she had vanished, carrying with her the last shred of his soul. On the 4th morning, his butler entered the study, his face pale, hands trembling. "Sir, a courier delivered this." He placed a thick envelope on the polished mahogany desk. Alexander stared at it as though it were a weapon. Slowly he opened it. The first page bore only 2 words: divorce petition. His breath caught. The papers blurred before his eyes. Page after page laid out the legal severance of their marriage, cold and clinical. But it was the last page that drove the knife deeper. Elena's handwritten note, delicate and trembling. "Alexander, I loved you more than life itself. I endured your doubts, your silence, your storms. But I will not let our child grow in a house poisoned by suspicion. I will raise this baby away from lies, away from venom, away from you. Goodbye." Tears he had buried since childhood clawed their way up. For years he had been taught that men of power did not weep, that kings carried their grief silently. But Alexander Grant, billionaire, heir, empire builder, fell to his knees and wept like a child. Helena and Adrian found him hours later, slumped in his study, the papers scattered like fallen leaves. My, Helena said smoothly, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "So the queen abandons her king. Tragic, yet predictable." Adrian chuckled. "Looks like the empire's legacy is still undecided, brother. Without her, without proof, the child might never even be recognized as a Grant, and that leaves the door wide open." Alexander's head snapped up, eyes blazing. "If you or your vulture of a mother dare touch them—" Helena raised a hand calmly. "Relax, darling. We wouldn't dream of harming Elena or her child. Why should we? You've already done the damage for us." Her words twisted deeper than any blade. She was right. It wasn't Helena who destroyed Elena's faith. It was him, his doubt, his pride. For the first time, Alexander realized the empire had cost him not just his marriage, but his humanity. That night, he drove through the city, desperate, searching. He traced every place Eleanor loved: the art gallery where they first kissed, the chapel where she prayed, the cafe where she laughed over coffee. All empty. Finally, in the small hours of the morning, he parked outside a modest townhouse in Brooklyn, Elena's childhood home. Lights glowed softly through the curtains. For a moment, he allowed himself to hope. He knocked. The door opened a fraction, revealing Elena's older sister. Her eyes hardened at the sight of him. "She doesn't want to see you," she said, coldly. "Please," Alexander begged, his voice raw. "Just 1 minute. Just let me explain." Her sister's gaze flicked over his disheveled suit, his haunted eyes. "You humiliated her. You accused her of betrayal in front of the entire world, and now you want forgiveness? No, Alexander. It's too late." The door closed, leaving him in the cold night. Weeks passed. Elena's absence hollowed the estate. Charles grew weaker, too ill to fight, while Helena tightened her grip on the board, whispering that Alexander's unstable personal life threatened the empire. Adrian moved boldly into Alexander's shadow, presenting himself as the capable heir. But Alexander barely fought back. His empire no longer mattered. Without Helena, without their child, the empire felt like a gilded coffin. Every night he wandered the empty halls, haunted by memories. Eleanor's laughter echoing from the gardens, her hand slipping into his at dinners, her whispered, "I believe in you," during his darkest days. Now the halls echoed with silence, and in that silence, one truth tortured him. He had not lost Elena to Marcus or Helena or fate. He had lost her to himself. Months later, the news reached him. A trusted aide entered his study, hesitant. "Sir, Elena has given birth. A healthy baby boy." Alexander's chest clenched, his hands trembling. A boy, his son, his heir. But the aide's next words shattered him. "They live quietly in Florence now. She has no intention of returning. She told the court the child will carry her name, not yours." The paper in Alexander's hand fell to the floor, his vision blurred. The empire, the fortune, the dynasty, it all slipped through his fingers like sand. He had fought his whole life for power, but in his blind pursuit he had destroyed the only thing that truly mattered. In the stillness of his empty mansion, Alexander whispered her name into the dome. "Darkness. Elena." But there was no answer. Only silence. Only regret. Because sometimes the greatest punishment is not losing the empire, not losing the wealth, but losing the one heart that loved you despite it all. And Alexander Grant, once the most powerful man in New York, was left with nothing but ghosts, his wife, his child, and the love he had shattered forever. The storm came quietly, not with thunder or lightning, but with a single piece of paper delivered to Alexander's study on a rainy afternoon. It was Dr. Harrington's confession. The old physician had grown frail, consumed by guilt. Knowing death approached, he chose to cleanse his soul. His letter trembled with regret. "Alexander, forgive me. Helena forced my hand. The reports I gave you were false, altered under threat and bribe. Your wife's pregnancy was never in question. The child was yours, always yours. I let greed blind me, and my silence destroyed your family. I beg for mercy, though I know I do not deserve it." The letter fell from Alexander's trembling fingers. His chest tightened, his breath ragged. He staggered backward, gripping the desk for balance. Elena had been innocent. Every tear, every plea, every whispered, "Trust me," all of it had been true. And he had been the betrayer. For hours he sat alone, replaying every moment. The night of the gala, the way her eyes had shattered when he demanded proof, the silence that followed her pleas. His heart cracked beneath the weight of his mistake. He rushed to find her, desperate to fix what was already broken. He called Florence, begged her family for a meeting, sent letters filled with apologies. At last a reply came. It was short, final. "Stay away from us. My child will never know a father who chose doubt over love." Meanwhile, the empire he had once controlled slipped through his hands. Helena and Adrian moved swiftly, presenting themselves as the only stable leaders to the board. Investors, spooked by the scandal, rallied behind Adrian. Charles Grant, too weak to intervene, could only watch his legacy rot. Days later, the patriarch passed away in his sleep, the empire's last true guardian gone. At the funeral, Alexander stood apart, alone. Helena wore black like a queen at her coronation, Adrian shaking hands with politicians as though he were already the new king. Whispers slithered through the mourners. "That's Alexander, isn't it? The one who accused his pregnant wife? The one who lost everything?" Phones tilted, pictures snapped, gossip blogs salivated. Elena did not come, nor did she send flowers. Her absence was louder than any accusation. The final blow came weeks later, when the official board meeting stripped Alexander of his position. Adrian stood at the head of the table, Helena smiling at his side, while Alexander faced the board he once commanded. "You've embarrassed this family," one director said coldly. "You've humiliated this company. The scandal alone cost us millions. You are no longer fit to lead." Alexander tried to speak, but his voice faltered. "The reports were false. My wife, she was innocent. It was all a conspiracy." Laughter rippled around the table. Helena tilted her head sweetly. "Conspiracy theories, Alexander? Really? After everything you've done?" Adrian smirked. "Face it, brother. You didn't lose because of us. You lost because of yourself." The vote was unanimous. Alexander Grant, once the golden heir, was cast out of his own empire. That night he returned to his empty penthouse. The city lights flickered outside, mocking him. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, hollow eyes, lined face, pride stripped away. On his desk sat a single photograph. Eleanor, radiant, laughing in the gardens of their estate. He traced her smile with trembling fingers. Whispers of the world reached him even here. Elena thriving in Florence, raising their son in peace. The boy already had her eyes, her laughter, and he would grow up never knowing the man who had thrown his mother to the wolves. The empire belonged to Adrian now. Society had turned its back. Friends had vanished. Respect, legacy, love, gone. All that remained was regret. Alexander Grant, who once commanded nations with a phone call, now had nothing, not even forgiveness. In the end, the truth had come too late. The woman he doubted had been pure. The child he rejected had been his heir, and the family he trusted had been his executioners. As he stood on the balcony of his penthouse, wind whipping through the night, Alexander finally understood the cruelest irony of all. He had not lost everything because of Helena's poison, or Adrian's ambition, or Marcus's shadow. He had lost it because he chose suspicion over love. And in that choice, he had destroyed himself. They say money can build empires, but it cannot build trust. Wealth can buy mansions, cars, power, and respect from strangers, but it cannot buy the one thing that keeps a heart alive: faith in the people you love. Alexander Grant had everything the world envies: billions in his account, his face on the covers of magazines, politicians begging for his handshake. But in the end, what did he have left? Nothing. Because when it mattered most, he chose doubt over trust, suspicion over love, pride over humility, and in doing so, he lost the only treasure worth keeping: his wife, his child, his family. Elena was innocent all along. Her love was pure. The child she carried was his, but his blindness allowed poison to rule him. He didn't just lose Elena, he drove her away. He didn't just lose his empire, he handed it to his enemies. And when the truth came, it was too late. Audience, think about this. How many times do we let doubt creep into our lives? How often do we believe the whispers of others instead of the voices of those who love us? How often do we let pride destroy what patience and faith could have saved? Alexander's story isn't just about a billionaire, it's about all of us, about how fragile trust can be, about how love, once broken, may never return. The greatest tragedy is not losing wealth. It's losing someone who would have stood by you through storms, but you let go of their hand. So if you have someone in your life today, a spouse, a parent, a friend, who has stood with you, trusted you, loved you, then hold them tighter. Believe them when they say, "I'm with you." Don't let whispers poison your heart, because one day, when they are gone, no amount of regret will bring them back. And remember this: empires fall, wealth fades, but love and trust are the only legacies worth leaving behind. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Because sometimes, one story can open your eyes and save your own empire of love.